And coming in at number 10, Vanish. Image Comics seems to be going back to its gritty, magical roots with Vanish. Vanish follows Oliver Harrison. This chosen one peaked at the age of 14 when he took down the leader of the biggest threat to his universe in a mystical place called the Everkeep. Now, as an adult, this chosen one indulges in every vice he can, living a mediocre, pretty sloppy life. Until a group of heroes show up called the Prestige, who are actually the followers of the threat that Oliver took down when he was 14. Now, using his magical abilities, Oliver takes it on himself to play the part of a hero in the disguise of a villain to bring down the heroic Prestige. The comic builds up this super cool, magic but violent world. It's incredibly gritty but filled with dark fantasy and magic, and it's just so cool. Number 9, Rogue Son. Dylan Siegel has been living life with his mom when he's suddenly called to a reading of his estranged father's will. Now, during that reading, he discovers his dear old dad was a superhero called Rogue Son, and now Dylan has been granted the superhero mantle for himself. Now, this super angsty teen is in charge of protecting our world from the forces of the supernatural, while also trying to figure out who exactly took down his dad. The art in this story is awesome, and Rogue Son's suit is incredibly cool. With really cool fire-based abilities and a whole lot of family drama, Rogue Son from Image Comics is a fun story you should definitely check out. Number 8, Dr. Multiverse. Alright, breaking away from Image Comics now and landing firmly in DC's territory, we have Maya Chamara, Dr. Multiverse. Dr. Multiverse is alone in the multiverse, meaning there is only one of her. Originating from Earth 8, Maya was bathed in cosmic energies and was granted the powers of the multiverse, which basically means that she's able to see variants and alternate versions of people living in different realities. She can see people and objects passing between dimensions, and she has the ability to locate and track anything she has come into contact with throughout the multiverse. She also has access to vast energy manipulation abilities, which let her fire blasts and create shields, but she can totally open up portals to other universes and send people back to their own universe. This former member of the Retaliators became part of the Justice League Incarnate, using her multiversal powers to help this multiversal team of heroes. She's like a DC version of Marvel's Captain Universe, Starbrand, and America Chavez all just mixed into one, but I think she's pretty alright.
Number 7, the Green Hornet. This is a character you are likely at least aware of due to the Seth Rogen movie and the classic 60s television show starring Bruce Lee, but the Green Hornet's history goes back even further than that. First appearing in his own radio series in 1936, the Green Hornet is really Britt Reed, the owner of the Daily Sentinel newspaper. At night, the Green Hornet fights evil with the help of his driver, Kato, in their supercar, the Black Beauty. What makes the Hornet unique is that he pretends to be a criminal so that he can infiltrate the various gangs of his city in order to take them down. In a fun bit of lore building, Britt's father is actually Dan Reed Jr., the nephew of the Lone Ranger. The Green Hornet made the jump from radio to the big screen in 1940, appearing in 2 serials, The Green Hornet and The Green Hornet Strikes Again. He appeared from time to time in his own comic book series, which adapted his radio stories, but his most iconic appearance was in the 1966 television show, which starred Van Williams as the Hornet and Bruce Lee as Kato. The show was made by the same team who made the 60s Batman show, but employed a more serious tone than the campy Batman show. It lasted for 1 season, but has managed to stay in the public consciousness, being the main inspiration for the 2011 film. The license for Green Hornet comics is currently with Dynamite Comics, who have taken him back to his Depression-era roots. If you want to familiarize yourself with the Hornet's sting, might I recommend Chuck Wagner's Green Hornet Year 1. Number 6, The Shadow. Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men? The Shadow knows! First created in 1930, The Shadow was originally the narrator of the Detective Story Hour radio program, which was created to help boost the sales of Detective Story magazine. People began asking the newsstand vendors for that Shadow Detective magazine, and the publishers decided to develop an actual character for the narrator and give him his own pulp magazine series. series, The Shadow magazine, which by 1937 received its own radio series. There was some inconsistencies between the character in the radio program and magazine appearances, so we'll go with the more well-known version of the story. The Shadow is a man who has traveled the world and learned how to cloud men's minds and become invisible, hiding in the shadows to attack criminals. He has taken over the life of a wealthy playboy named Lamont Cranston, whose identity he uses to fund his exploits and gather intel from his friend, the police commissioner. If this sounds kinda Batman-y to you, then you would be right, as the Shadow was a major influence on Batman's modus operandi. In fact, the Shadow's story, Partners of Peril, was lifted almost verbatim by Bob Kane when he wrote the first Batman story featured in Detective Comics number 27. Both feature the hero investigating a series of murders of a group of businessmen who own a chemical syndicate together. Both feature the hero getting trapped under a glass dome that fills with gas that they then plug with a handkerchief, proving once again that Bob Kane was a talentless hack who would have never been remembered if it weren't for Bill Finger. The Shadow has appeared in pulp magazines and radio dramas and films over the years. His most recent feature film was in 1994, starring Alec Baldwin as the title character. It's actually pretty underrated. The character is currently licensed to Dynamite Comics and has a pretty extensive catalog of appearances available for readers. Number 5. The Phantom. The Phantom first appeared in comic strips in 1936 in the fictional African country of Bangala after a castaway whose ship was attacked by pirates washed up on shore and was adopted by the locals. He swore revenge on all evildoers and developed the persona of the Ghost Who Walks, otherwise known as the Phantom. The mantle is passed down through generations, with each new Phantom being sworn to protect the jungles of Bangala. The Phantom whose adventures are most commonly followed is Kit Walker, the 21st Phantom. Although his purple costume might come across as silly, he was the first hero to wear skin-tight clothes and a mask which obscured the pupils, leaving only the white eyes, something that is of course a staple of masked superheroes now. He is also known for wearing 2 rings, one of which he uses to leave a skull-shaped mark on the villains he punches. The Phantom has appeared in comics, novels, serials, and a live-action movie in 1996 starring Billy Zane. Number 4. The Spider. The Spider was created in 1933 to be a direct competitor to the Shadow. He is really millionaire Richard Wentworth, who disguises himself in early appearances by wearing a mask, a wig, and a false hunchback. He has no issues with killing his enemies and always used his ring to leave a spider-shaped mark on his victims' foreheads so no one but him would be blamed for his actions. He is aided by his manservant Ram Singh and is a master of disguise, adopting several aliases in order to infiltrate and gather information. His stories are notable for being extremely violent, with the various villains' death tolls routinely going into the thousands by the end of each story. He was the first pulp hero to be given a live-action serial in 1938, where he was given a new look that featured a red spiderweb, which helped to distinguish him from the Shadow. In the years since his pulp novel appearances, the Spider has been featured in comic book series published by Eclipse Comics, Moonstone Books, and Dynamite Entertainment, who adopted Spider's serial costume to the page for the character. Number 3. Black Bat. There are actually 2 Black Bats. The first from 1933, who was a roaming detective who left bat-themed calling cards, and the more popular one from 1939, who debuted around the same time as Batman. Anthony Quinn was a district attorney until one day in court someone threw a vial of acid in his face, which disfigured and blinded him. In the words of Tobey Maguire, it looks very, similar. The attack blinded Quinn, but fortunately a police officer who is dying from gangsters' bullets donates his eyes to Quinn. After the surgery, Quinn is not only able to see normally, but can also see in the dark. He becomes a costumed crime fighter who leaves bat-shaped stickers on his victims, so much like the Spider, no one else is blamed for his crimes. Because he and Batman hit the stands around the same time, both publishers sued each other, but the editor of DC Comics, Whitney Ellsworth, managed to broker an agreement that made both companies leave each other free to publish bat-themed stories, although Batman certainly is the more well-remembered of the two. Number 2. Sheena, Queen of the Jungle. Debuting in January 1938, a full 6 months before Superman, is Sheena, the very first female superhero to receive her own self-titled book. Sheena was an orphan who was raised by an African witch doctor who taught her how to survive and various African languages. She grew up in the jungle and learned to communicate with its animals. She eventually becomes friends with a hunter named Bob Reynolds, and the two protect the jungle from giants, dinosaurs, cults, vampire apes, and everything else under the sun. Sheena was co-created by Jerry Iger and comics legend Will Eisner, and appeared in comics and pulp novels and received her own TV series in 1955 and 2000, and a live-action film titled simply Sheena in 1984. She is also the inspiration for both Tina Turner's stage persona and the Ramones song Sheena is a Punk Rocker. Like many of the pre-Golden Age heroes on this list, she is currently licensed to Dynamite Entertainment, who released new comics about this classic hero. Number 1. Mandrake the Magician. First appearing in newspaper strips in 1934, several historians credit Mandrake, not the Man of Steel, as being the first comic book superhero. He is a stage magician who uses hypnotic gestures to make people see illusions, which he of course also uses to help him fight crime. He has the power to teleport, shapeshift, levitate, and to become invisible. His hat and wand possess great magic and were passed down to him by his father, Theron. He fights both criminals and supernatural threats, aliens, and figures from other dimensions. He's like Zatanna and Doctor Strange rolled into one. Mandrake appeared in comic strips until 2013, but never really had his own comic books, aside from reprints and a few miniseries, one of which was actually released by Marvel. He has guest starred in stories for the Phantom and Flash Gordon, and a series featuring a new character taking up the mantle called Legacy of Mandrake the Magician, which was released in 2020 by Red 5 Comics. He appeared in his own movie serial in 1939, and there have been a few attempts to adapt the character for film and television, but none have panned out.
Number 10. Tosin Oduye. Tosin is such a cool character. Okay, so as a kid, Tosin Oduye saw the way that Wakanda became a socially isolated nation who believed themselves superior and seemed to always attract war. The Marube, the tribe Tosin belongs to, began to separate a bit from the main Wakandan people. They hated the way Wakanda used vibranium for tech, so they instead found a way to refine the vibranium and flow with it. They gave themselves vibranium tattoos, and some in their tribe, who trained hard enough, could have the vibranium flow with them, granting them some pretty cool powers. It's like they harness the energy of vibranium and can use it to move extremely fast, or unleash vibranium energy blasts, or even seemingly grant himself a vibranium armor. Last thing I want to say is that the covers for the issues of this volume of Black Panther are just so cool. Definitely check it out.
Number 9. Aleph Chernikov. Aleph Chernikov is a young mutant hero who appears in the Wolverine Patch flashback series by Larry Hama. This was a miniseries that came out earlier in 2022 and covered an untold tale from Patch's adventures in Madripoor back in the good old days. Here Patch works to help 3 Russian mutants who have escaped their government, but have been tracked to Madripoor. Madripoor is military, royal armed guards, as well as S.H.I.E.L.D. and Russia themselves appear to be after the mutants, but Patch, Archie, and Tiger intervene in hopes of helping the 3. In the end they do, and among them is Aleph, the child of the other 2 mutants, David and Raisa. Aleph appears to be the main focus of everyone's efforts when it comes to hunting them down. They possess powerful healing abilities, psionic abilities, and possibly even the power to manipulate reality. But they're also a child, so of course everyone's like, we gotta protect this baby.
Number 8. Bitewing. There's nothing that wins me over more than a puppy. But then DC goes and gives a puppy a 3-legged gray blue-eyed pitbull puppy and gives it to Nightwing, probably one of the best members of the Bat family. And then they go and give it the nickname of Bitewing. I literally teared up just typing this part because of the overload of adorable that I got while looking at this. Haley the dog was being chased and mistreated by some teenagers when Dick Grayson stepped in, rescued, and adopted her. Now, the first sidekick turned full-on hero in DC Comics has his very own super pet, especially after she was given a costume and the ability to speak from a 5th-dimensional imp. Now, she fights alongside Nightwing as Bitewing, and it's cute. It's very cute. Number 7. Sunfire. Shiro Yoshida, otherwise known as Sunfire, is the premier superhero of Japan in Marvel Comics. He is also an alpha-level mutant who possesses the power to manipulate solar radiation. This power allows Sunfire to fly, produce plasma blasts, plasma shields, and generate plasma temperatures of around 1 million degrees Fahrenheit. His powers are pretty similar to those of Johnny Storm, interestingly enough, but Shiro Yoshida is fiercely patriotic, usually choosing to fight for his country over most other teams, and while historically he has normally been a villain, he has been a part of the X-Men and does ultimately do what's best for whoever he is representing. The character's origin and early days had a lot to do with disdain for America specifically, which is kind of fair considering his mother was a survivor of Hiroshima. Shiro is an awesome character who just doesn't get enough time in the light in my opinion, and also having a Japanese hero would help open up a bit more representation in the MCU, which is always welcome. Number 6. Hawkgirl. A movie centered around DC Comics' Hawkgirl might seem like a weird choice, but I think it would be an excellent addition to the superhero film genre for several reasons. First and foremost, Hawkgirl brings a unique and captivating mythology, drawing from an ancient Egyptian lore and reincarnation themes. Her backstory as a former Egyptian princess and a warrior who reincarnates throughout time adds a lot of depth and complexity to the character, making her a fascinating protagonist to explore. Hawkgirl possesses an array of incredible abilities though as well, including enhanced strength, flight, obviously, and mastery of advanced weaponry. These powers, combined with her warrior spirit and strong leadership qualities, make her a pretty powerful and inspiring figure. Now of course this is all similar to Hawkman and he has most of these abilities as well, but Hawkgirl is just cooler, I'm sorry. A Hawkgirl movie would offer the opportunity to delve into complex interpersonal dynamics, particularly her relationship with Hawkman, an eternal love across lifetimes which would provide a compelling emotional anchor for the film. Lastly, as a member of the Justice League, Hawkgirl's inclusion would also open up the door to expanding the DC Extended Universe. A Hawkgirl or maybe even a Hawkgirl and Hawkman movie would just be super cool. I think we can all agree. Number 5. Captain Atom. Nathaniel Atom was transformed into Captain Atom in the 60s after being semi-forced to participate in a potentially fatal experiment sitting at ground zero of a nuclear explosion encased in an alien metal. Now the explosion didn't kill him. What it did do was bond the alien metal to his flesh, giving him superpowers and throwing him 20 or so years forward into the present day. The alien metal gave him incredible abilities such as flight, matter manipulation, energy manipulation, time manipulation, energy absorption, telepathy, spatial manipulation, quantum manipulation, force field creation, time travel, magic, and mind manipulation, and control of the quantum field. These powers have let him perform some insane feats like creating a universe within the quantum field and later destroying that universe, fighting Superboy Prime, easily defeating a team composed of multiple versions of himself, and before absorbing them and creating an explosion powerful enough to destroy a universal space-time continuum. Now, I think a lot of that is a bit massive for a single superhero film, but I find this character extremely interesting, and I think maybe a space-focused movie about this character would do pretty well if it was handled with a bit more of a serious tone, and I could see it having some mind-blowing visuals. Number 4. Sentry. Robert Reynolds was an addict and a broken man who was granted the power of 1,000,000 exploding suns after illegally partaking in the Golden Sentry Serum, which was an offshoot of the original Super Soldier Serum, except like 100,000 times more powerful. He has photokinetic-based powers fueled by the sun itself that include molecular manipulation, immortality, insane super strength, speed, invulnerability, stamina, agility, reflexes, and senses, flight, teleportation, energy absorption and blast, psionic abilities, and more. Now he used this power for the greater good of all and put together a costume to make his debut as the Sentry. He was the example of what a hero should be. He had connections to Iron Man, was active during the years just prior to the Fantastic Four's emergence. He became a role model for Spider-Man as well as an ally to the X-Men, an equal to Reed Richards, and a friend to the Hulk. He is one of the world's greatest superheroes until the Void arrived. The Void nearly took out Sentry's sidekick Scout. It drove the Hulk into a rampage and took the lives of over 1 million people in Manhattan. When Reynolds realized that the Void was his own dark persona, he enlisted Doctor Strange and Reed Richards, and together they wiped the memory of Sentry from everyone in the world, including themselves. That origin story in the comics, plus his awesome internal struggle with his dark persona, would honestly make for a pretty awesome superhero movie. I'm just saying. Number 3. Wildcats. Wildcats centered around the centuries-long war between aliens called Cherubim and Daemonites. Cherubims, a nearly immortal human-looking alien race with exceptional powers and skills, traveled to Earth and by breeding with humans, populated the planet with half-breeds. Daemonites, on the other hand, besides being incredibly scary to look at, also possess various superhuman abilities, including body possession and mental control over human beings. Now, this movie wouldn't really be a single superhero-focused film. It would be more of an ensemble thing, which hasn't had the best track record in film format. Movies like the first Suicide Squad did not go over well and were hurt by an ensemble. Eternals also hurt from having an ensemble, but I thought it was kind of okay. The second Suicide Squad movie worked out pretty alright though, and I think if handled correctly, the Wildcats could make for a pretty good film and boost up the team for unfamiliar readers in a similar way to something like Guardians of the Galaxy. Number 2, Jack of Hearts. Jack Hart was the son of a brilliant scientist. A scientist that created the ridiculously efficient liquid sci-fi fuel called Zero Fluid. In his tragic comic book backstory, Jack was exposed to this fluid and it gave him his awesome but difficult to control abilities. Importantly, he was also part alien with his mother hailing from the Contraxian race, so that's a whole other thing to this as well. Now, due to the cellular mutation that took place after his Zero Fluid exposure, Jonathan Hart is now able to produce pink concussive energy beams and blasts from his hands and body, taking up the incredibly clever name of Jack of Hearts, apparently in honor of his father's love of card games and not because that's his name, basically. Jack of Hearts can use his Zero Energy Blast to fly at speeds currently not specifically known, but he has flown halfway across the United States in 3 minutes flat, so it's pretty fast. His biological structure was reformatted to basically give him the superhuman starter pack of abilities, but his strength has been able to lift 25 tons. He has enhanced speed, stamina, healing factor, and durability, able to withstand some pretty heavy hits and survive in the vacuum of space. But in addition, thanks to a quote symbiote energy sump device, Jack went through another mutation which gave him the ability to think as fast as a computer can, and he can retain and retrieve stored information from the deep recesses of his brain, which is pretty cool, I'm not gonna lie. Given the nature of his stories and the way the MCU is opening up to space and the multiverse, I think it would be doable to introduce this character, although he has been difficult to write stories for in the past, so I think it would need some reworking. And finally, in at number 1, it's the Silver Surfer. Now, I know the character has been featured in the second Fantastic Four movie back in the day, and he was cool and all, but his story specifically focused on Norrin Radd and Galactus properly? Come on. As a herald of Galactus, the Devourer of Worlds, the Silver Surfer's journey from being an unwilling servant to a cosmic hero, saving entire worlds from destruction, is filled with existential themes and moral dilemmas. The movie could explore the character's profound introspection and inner conflict as he grapples with the weight of his past and the choices he must make to protect his universe. The cosmic scope of Silver Surfer's adventures would allow for awesome space exploration, celestial battles, and mind-bending visuals. Plus, his encounters with other heroes like the Fantastic Four, Thor, and Nova could make exciting crossover potential within the Marvel Cinematic Universe. A Silver Surfer movie would not only offer thrilling action and epic cosmic conflicts, but also delve into deep philosophical themes and open up the cosmic side of the MCU just a touch more.
Number 10, Alpha Flight. This is for sure the least obscure entry on the list, as I choose to talk about them constantly, and Alpha Flight has been somewhat reinvented in the last few years and changed into an international space force being led by Captain Marvel, but we are talking about the original team. First appearing in X-Men number 120, Alpha Flight was Canada's answer to the Avengers, with members with unique abilities from all over Canada. Unlike most super teams who are always working together, Alpha Flight operated in more of a Mission Impossible, James Bond kind of style, by choosing heroes from their roster and assigning each of them to specific missions that they would handle as individuals and pairs, only coming together as a full team in the case of extreme threats. Despite multiple tries by Marvel to give the team their own ongoing series, Alpha Flight has never quite caught on in the States. Perhaps they are just too specifically Canadian for a readership who tends to prefer American-centric stories, or maybe they just haven't been given the right push into the mainstream. Either way, Alpha Flight remains a team that not a huge amount of readers have heard of, and even fewer have actually read. Although, they did appear in one episode of the classic X-Men cartoon. Small victories. Number 9, Force Works. When it was determined that the Avengers Avengers' ever-expanding roster should be better divided up across the United States, rather than everyone working out of New York, the West Coast Avengers were formed. This experiment didn't end up working out, and the team was soon disbanded. In a typically Tony Stark move, Tony Stark decided that he should instead fund and create his own superhero team to help protect the West Coast. The resulting team was ForceWorks. The original team consisted of Iron Man, Spider-Woman, Wonder Man, and US Agent, with Scarlet Witch being chosen as the team leader. The team operated for a while, taking on threats like the Mandarin and Kang the Conqueror, but the team was plagued with internal issues. Despite Scarlet Witch being the team leader, Iron Man was constantly undermining her authority and forcing the team to carry out his personal vendettas. This attitude culminated in him forcing the team to brutally kidnap Hawkeye, which got him booted from the team. ForceWorks carried on without him for a while, but eventually decided to disband, although they were briefly brought back under the leadership of Maria Hill in order to fight the Robot Revolution. ForceWorks is an obscure offshoot of the already relatively obscure West Coast Avengers, however they did serve as the supporting cast for Iron Man's 90s animated series. Number 8. The Outlaws. Not to be confused with the team from DC Comics, Marvel's Outlaws are a group of heroes, all with a criminal past, who are led by Spider-Man and Silver Sable. The group formed when photographic evidence came out implicating Spider-Man in a robbery. Wanting to prove the innocence of the man who had helped them reform, Prowler, Rocket Racer, Will-O-the-Wisp, Paladin, and Sandman all began searching for evidence that would prove the webbed wall crawler's innocence. They discovered that Spidey was actually working for Silver Sable, and that what he had stolen was actually incriminating evidence against a member of the Maggia crime family. Impressed with the group's skills, Silver Sable brought them on as freelancers, and the team would occasionally come together, usually whenever Spider-Man was being framed or something and needed support from outside of the Avengers. Although some of the various members of the team are relatively well-known characters, their team isn't well known, as they come together so rarely and haven't teamed up since 1991.
Number 7. Zatanna. A lot of people sleep on Zatanna, and that is a mistake. Zatanna is part of the Homo Magi race, giving her a genetic talent for magic that makes her one of the greatest magic users in the DC universe. Zatanna was born with magic, but she's not limited by that. With the addition of learned magics, Zatanna can cast a whole multitude of spells that allow her to do things like travel dimensions, summon objects and beings, perform telekinesis and advanced telepathy, redirect and return attacks, mess with the weather or even time of day, manipulate her own size, transform into basically anything, become intangible, and manipulate magical versions of the elements. But that's all the basic stuff. She can cast spells that can manipulate reality, alter the molecular structure of objects, and move forward, backwards, and freeze time itself. And that's not even getting into what she can do with black magic. She has the potential to make child's play out of most of the people in the Justice League despite that fact. But Zatanna's backstory of becoming a successful stage illusionist before discovering her true magical powers and her half-Homo Magi parentage while investigating the disappearance of her father? You can't tell me that wouldn't make for a great movie. Number 6. Martian Manhunter. John Johns, or John Jones on Earth, is another character that people really sleep on. But this guy is insane with his level of ability. John is the last of his race of Martians, and he is extremely powerful and should never be slept on. He speaks with the resolve and intelligence of someone who's been around for a very hot minute, and that's because he has been. According to DC Comics, he is in the ballpark of around or over 220 million years old. John arrived on Earth after he was pulled here through space and time by a teleportation beam during an experiment conducted by a Dr. Saul Erdel, who passed away from the shock of actually finding a Martian shortly afterwards, which actually kind of makes sense. But way before that, John's race, the Martians, were practically wiped out a long time ago, leaving him completely alone and isolated. But now, pulled forward in time and finally on Earth with no one to tell him what the heck was going on, he eventually used his shapeshifting abilities to become a detective, operating in Middletown, America. He mainly operated from the safety of his human persona before he eventually exposed himself to the world and became a founding member of the Justice League, and also one of its most powerful members, being even stronger and more capable than Superman with an even more impressive list of abilities. And that makes him a good candidate for a movie, just saying. Number 5. Mr. Miracle. This one would be a bit of a different movie, and I think it would work well as a duo with the character of Orion. Basically, Scott Free, aka Mr. Miracle, is the son of DC's Highfather, who is essentially the opposite to the villain Darkseid. As part of a truce with Darkseid, Scott was traded with Darkseid's son, Orion. While Orion got to live a pretty good life with Highfather and become a hero, Scott was treated incredibly badly living on Apokolips as basically a prisoner of Darkseid. But despite the hellish conditions on Apokolips, Scott was able to retain his inherent goodness, and using his skill as a master escape artist, and despite the fact that he is a pacifist, he escaped from Darkseid's clutches. Telling that story in a movie format would be awesome, and then it could lead into more stories with the rest of DC's roster of cinematic heroes. I personally think his story is incredibly interesting and unique. Number 4. Darkhawk. Christopher Powell was the son of a cop and a district attorney, and when he witnessed his father taking a bribe from a mob boss, he happened to stumble upon an amulet that gave him the ability to transfer his consciousness to the Darkhawk armor. This ancient Shi'ar magical armor is very cool, and it gave Chris quite the set of abilities. Obviously, the classic superhuman strength, speed, durability, agility, and reflexes are all here in excess, but the armor allowed for armament conjuration from the extra-dimensional expanse, whatever that means, and basically had untapped potential. As time went on and he eventually gained the ability to go to space, he learned of the Shi'ar origins of his suit and of the fraternity of raptors, that are basically like Marvel's over-the-top, super cool space cops. Almost like Green Lanterns, but cooler and less utilized. I'm just imagining how Darkhawk could fit into the MCU's ever-expanding roster and stories, and I think it would be a missed opportunity to not include the character. Number 3. Starbrand. Starbrand isn't so much a singular person as it is a power in and of itself. Right now, the current Starbrand in the 616 universe is Brandy Selby, the daughter of Suzanne Selby, who became the Starbrand after the one before her, Kevi Connor, passed away. The Avengers stepped in and had to help Suzanne deliver little Brandy, an act that caused Suzanne to pass away, sadly, and attach the Starbrand to Brandy. Since Brandy's birth, she's used the Starbrand to fly and survive without oxygen and in the vacuum of space, and she can use extremely powerful energy blasts that can take down multiple people at once. But the Starbrand itself is an incredible source of power, proven by other people who have wielded it. The bearer of Earth 723's Starbrand used the power to create music that can influence human behavior, to the extent that he has unified the people of his world as a single hive mind. Earth 541 is the home of a Starbrand bearer who has conquered his world and installed himself as the head of a benevolent monarchical dictatorship, but like a good one that actually somehow works despite the lack of freedom. The Starbrand power takes on many different forms, but doesn't seem to be bound by physics, and supplies the bearer infinite power limited only by their imagination. While that kind of power sort of breaks a lot of things in the MCU, the amount of Starbrand bearers going back millions of years gives a plethora of character stories to pick from, and I mean, let's be honest, someone being granted an ancient incredible power is a classic basis for a superhero movie. Number 2. Nightwing. Now, Nightwing is in no way a forgotten hero, not even a little bit. But explain to me how we have had around 11 Batman live-action movies, and I don't think Nightwing has appeared as Nightwing in a single one. Well, now I don't want him just featured, I want a full-on Nightwing movie in Bloodhaven with little to no Batman. Of all the members of the Bat family, Dick Grayson was not only the very first, but for a lot of people, including me, he is the favorite. Born to a family of acrobats, orphaned and then taken in by Bruce Wayne, Dick became the very first Robin, appearing in Detective Comics number 38 in 1940, created by Bob Kane and Bill Finger, and illustrated by Jerry Robinson. As you can imagine, he has a long history, and as such, a large amount of experience and proficiency. He was the leader of the Teen Titans for a while, and when his Robin career came to an end, he became Nightwing to honor another hero by the same name from Krypton, Superman's home planet. He has gone on to take the Batman mantle a couple of times, but honestly, it was in 1995 and 1996 when he received his own stories that he really became his own. To set Nightwing apart from Batman, he was given his own city, the decaying harbor town known as Bloodhaven, which was just north of Gotham. It allowed him to be close enough to Gotham to stay part of the Batman family, as well as have his own city and series of adventures, and honestly, some of them are even darker and somewhat better and more compelling than some of Batman's own stories. And finally, in at number 1, Blue Marvel. A former Marine and scientist turned superhero, Adam Brashear is not only one of the strongest heavy hitters in Marvel Comics, but he is also one of the smartest characters and one of my absolute underutilized favorites. His origins take place in the 1960s during a project to use antimatter as an energy source. Adam and his best friend Connor were caught in an explosion that turned Adam into a living, stable antimatter reactor. Luckily, this also gave him superpowers, which he used to become the masked hero known as the Blue Marvel. Unfortunately though, Connor became unstable both physically and mentally and became the incredibly powerful villain Anti-Man. During one of their biggest and climactic fights, the Blue Marvel's mask was torn, revealing to the world that he was African American. Due to the socio-political climate of America in the 1960s, President John F. Kennedy asked Blue Marvel to take an early retirement to ease racial tensions. It wasn't until decades later in the modern age that Adam would once again step up as the Blue Marvel, one of the most interesting and powerful heroes the world has, yet one that often feels really underappreciated. A movie for this character would give him the fame that he rightly deserves. Number 10. Savage Dragon. The Savage Dragon is one of Image Comics' most popular and long-lasting characters, and he has been around since his debut as just Dragon in Graphic Fantasy #1 in June of 1982. Basically, the Savage Dragon woke up butt naked and with no memory in a burning field. He was a giant green, quote, man with a big fin on the top of his head and super ripped, like pretty much all heroes are. Now, what we didn't know at the time was that he was actually an alien conqueror named Kerr, who originally came to Earth to conquer it, but was betrayed by two scientists. He was an enhanced member of the alien race called the Krillin, and his enhanced Krillin physiology gave him superhuman strength, agility, and stamina, healing abilities, and telepathic resistances. Now, one of my favorite parts about this hero is that instead of joining a superhero team and being a typical hero, the dragon actually wound up being a member of the Chicago Police Department and helped them with their, quote, super freak problem. I think it's cool to kind of ground the character like that, and I think it would make a great movie. I don't know. Number 9. Animal Man. Thanks to an encounter with some rather strange aliens, which actually happened to be a ruse by the totems of the Parliament of Limbs, Bernard Buddy Baker gained access to the morphogenic field, otherwise known as the Red. This field basically allows Buddy to absorb and use different attributes of nearby animals while still being a human. So he has been able to move his eyes independently like a chameleon, he has been able to ram against the speeding car with the abilities of a rhino, he can fly by tapping into the abilities of birds, he's regenerated a whole lost limb by tapping into an earthworm, he's gained the strength to lift a car by tapping into a spider, and he's ran at 75 miles per hour by adopting the abilities of an ant. The character of Animal Man explores profound philosophical themes, including environmentalism, animal rights, and the interconnectedness of all living beings. His stories, particularly Grant Morrison's run on the character, were actually surprisingly really dark. I don't know if that could really be adapted to be a normal, old superhero movie for a family-friendly DCU, but it could make an interesting standalone film maybe. All I know is the character deserves more recognition, and a movie would do that. Number 8. Captain Britain. There is actually a whole Captain Britain core made up of all versions of Captain Britain from across the Omniverse, but for this point, we are specifically going to cover Earth 616's protector, Dr. Brian Braddock. Brian Braddock brings a distinctive blend of British charm, valor, and honor, presenting a fresh and unique superhero persona. His origin story, involving the mystical amulet of Right and the wizard, or entity, of Merlin, and the parallel dimension of Otherworld, kind of gives us a fresh and fantastical backdrop, allowing for pretty good visuals and epic battles if it were adapted to the screen. Captain Britain's powers, granted by the amulet of Right, grant him superhuman strength, agility, and the ability to fly, which is nothing really new, but that's not really what would draw people in anyways. The character of Brian Braddock is complex and relatable, grappling with the responsibilities of wielding immense power while maintaining his own sense of identity. A Captain Britain movie would not only showcase his crazy adventures, but also delve into themes of duty, identity, and personal growth, and then, due to the multiversal nature of his conflicts, it would slot really well into the MCU and would make for a fun watch just in general. Number 7. Batwalker. I'm gonna be honest, I just assumed this had already been done in the past, but No. Dinosaur versions of DC superheroes had not been done before. I'm alright with this because that means this year we were treated to the Jurassic League, a DC story that takes place on an Earth where heroes like Batman, Wonder Woman, and Superman are actually dinosaurs that protect the puny human race from the carnivore dinosaurs who would eat them. There's a Brachiosaurus supersaur from another world who looks eerily like Superman, a Triceratops Wonder Dawn hailing from the Isle of Trimascara, and on the outskirts of Growltham City, we are introduced to Bat Walker, an Allosaurus who dresses up like a bat after the loss of his parents at the hands of an insane Dilophosaurus who goes by the name Jokerzard. I mean, there's even a panel of this comically green Allosaurus throwing a stone batarang, and it's just something that I never knew I needed in my life until this point. I'm just so glad it exists. Number 6. The Spirit of Variance, Vox Igni. Sean Cassidy is not a new character by any stretch of the imagination, but in Legion of X number 7 by Marvel, he does become something completely new. Sean was betrayed by Moira McTaggart, who stole his face so she could enter into Krakoa. So when he was brought back to life, he was rather upset. Now there's a whole thing going on as well with the character of Legion right now that I just can't get into, but essentially a character named Mother Righteous offers Legion a gift in the form of a certain kind of power. David Haller refuses this gift, but luckily for us, Sean Cassidy was there to take it instead. Making a deal with Mother Righteous, Cassidy was given, or I guess possessed by, a cast out spirit of vengeance called the Spirit of Variance. This transformed Banshee into a flaming skull version of himself named Vox Igni, which is the voice of fire, and if a name like that doesn't sound cool to you, then just look at this character. Good golly, he's awesome. Number 5. Bat Prince. Another alternate version of Batman, I know, but he belongs to probably one of my favorite alternate reality stories to come out of DC Comics, Dark Knights of Steel. This story takes place in a world of medieval fantasy where the Wayne family ruled their kingdom until the mother and father of Superman came to Earth. The L family house became rulers of the land after a horrible attack on the Wayne family. Now, as the surviving son of the Waynes, Bruce serves as both a knight and son to the L family, with his network of Robins and his brilliant mind. But as the world is at each other's throats in this story, this Bat Prince learns about the actions that led to his birth and the powers he now possesses as a half-Kryptonian Dark Knight. Dark Knights of Steel that came out this year in 2022 just has so many interesting and fresh takes on classic DC characters. It's fresh and fun, and I got a variant cover of the first issue and it looks so sweet. Maybe one day I'll let you guys see it. Maybe. But definitely read the story. Definitely do it. Number 4. Miracle Man. Miracle Man is also not a new character. In fact, Marvel's Miracle Man is one of comics' most dramatic publishing debacles, coming back from 1954. Decades of rights battles over the character meant that he kind of bounced around publishers and then disappeared from the pages of comics altogether for a long time, which is why it seemed way too good to be true when Marvel announced in 2013 that it had acquired the rights to Miracle Man. Now, over the years, the company has attempted to bring the character back, but even more legal issues kind of stopped that from being able to happen. But luckily, starting in October 2022, Neil Gaiman finally continued the Silver Age arc that he had created for the character, with Marvel planning a number of other Miracle Man books. So now, after all this time, we get both one of the newest and kind of one of the oldest characters all wrapped up into one awesome Miracle Man, Marvel Man, Mickey Moran, whatever you want to call him, shaped package. Number 3. Abyss. Alright, before you jump on me in the comments, this isn't the villain Abyss. That guy was Lex Luthor's own evil Batman, who was honestly kinda cool, but he did not last very long. Abyss was defeated by Batman, who got some massive help from a Bodnesian police officer named Detective Kea, who helped Batman not only survive, but even forced Abyss to retreat after he had defeated most of Batman Incorporated, which led him straight into a defeat at the hands of the Dark Knight himself. Now, after Abyss had been defeated, Kaya found some of the villain's equipment and decided to hunt down the ones who had ended her parents' lives. There's a lot of parallels between Batman and the characters in and around him in the later issues of Batman Volume 3 that came out this year in 2022. Anyways, Batman offered to help Kaya, but in helping her, he also talked her into just arresting the criminals instead of doing what she was planning to do, which I'm sure you can imagine what that was. She wasn't brought into Batman Inc., but she is now another ally of Batman, and I hope she gets some more appearances in the comics from this point on because the costume's pretty cool. Number 2, the Joneses. How about a whole family of superheroes for this spot? And not just that, but also some social and political commentary wrapped up into it. That sounds like so much fun. Not really. Anyways, out of AWA Studios comes The Joneses, which is a spin-off of another AWA Studios comic called The Resistance, and it focuses on a suburban family who have gained superpowers after a global pandemic known as the Great Death. All 4 family members, mother, father, sister, and brother, were all transformed into something superhuman, but unfortunately, the world has begun to embrace fascism, born of fear of the pandemic and the superpowered individuals that have appeared known as the Reborns. The Joneses face some pretty scary consequences if they are exposed as reborns, and so they are presented with the dilemma of using their abilities for good at the risk of exposing themselves and inviting danger, or just laying low and staying out of the way. It's an interesting little idea for a comic book, and the global pandemic idea seems a little bit familiar. I don't know why. So I found it fun to just jump into this little 2022 comic from AWA Studios, and maybe you will too. Number 1, Guts and Glory. If you're part of the Thunderbolts, are you really a hero? Yes, you are. The problem for me and this list is that when Guts and Glory first appeared in Thunderbolts Volume 4 number 1 from August 2022, we weren't really given much information on the guy, and we still haven't been really, which makes my job way harder. He was placed on Hawkeye's Thunderbolts team under the mayor of New York, Luke Cage. The only reason given for this character's introduction to the team was that apparently having a quote man of mystery would do wonders for the team's public relations. That's actually the reason. There's literally nothing else given about why he's here. He is a big stocky guy with cyborg body parts and an absolutely insane amount of weaponry, including a particle rupture laser, which I don't even want to imagine what that thing does to a person. It just sounds horrible. He also looks a bit like Cable, as he's a totally 90s cyber-inspired warrior, but just more military and not nearly as old as Cable, with absolutely no information about his backstory, again, or his training. Thank you. Thank you so much, Marvel. Please change this. Gutson is cool, okay? Thank you. Kicking off the list at number 10 today is Deadman. Boston Brand was the only son of Gary and Barbara Brand, and his parents were very much not great. When his parents didn't fight each other, they took out their anger on Boston. Because of that, when he was 16 years old, he lashed out against his parents and ran away from home. As you do when you are a fictional character who runs away from home, Boston joined the circus and eventually became an elite gymnast and trapeze performer. While that was great for him, he could not leave his past behind and frequently sought out some form of peace in the bottle and would often become physical with people. Everything for Boston changed though when during one show an assassin from the League of Assassins named Hook took his life during his trapeze performance. When he passed away, Boston was placed in between life and death by the Hindu goddess of balance, Ramakrishna. She told him that he needed to atone for his past transgressions and egocentrism. As punishment, he was to return to the world as a ghost, invisible to most of the world, and he was to better the lives of others using his ghostly abilities, namely the ability to possess others. Now I don't know about you, but I could see that being easily adapted into a pretty compelling movie. If you've ever seen the Ricky Gervais movie Ghost Town, just take that and superfy it. Number 9, Hellcat. During her formative years, Patsy Walker's fame-obsessed mother, Dorothy, would use her daughter as a way to make a buck, usually while also living vicariously through her daughter, and constantly disapproving of her tomboy nature. Dorothy would pressure her daughter into modeling, and when that didn't work out, due to Patsy's own lack of interest and commitment, Dorothy started a comic book containing fictionalized romantic adventures of her daughter as a teenager, which is super weird. Despite being super creepy, this did give Patsy Walker some notoriety in the Marvel Universe before she finally joined up with the hero she idolized, the Avengers. And that story itself is kind of funny, Because, basically, using tactics learned from her mother, Patsy blackmailed the mutant Hank McCoy, aka Beast, into helping her transform into a superhero. Patsy tracked down Beast while he was an Avenger and forced him to allow her to accompany them on a mission. During the Avengers ride-along, Patsy found an old costume that once belonged to Greer Nelson, aka Tigra, who could also get her own movie, just saying, but during her early days as the Cat. Now Patsy took the gear for herself and assumed the identity Hellcat. Thanks to the suit, her natural ability plus experience over time with training from Moondragon and her husband Damon Hellstrom, Hellcat has become a force to be reckoned with in Marvel Comics. I think her origin story is pretty damn unique, and I think with a little tweaking it can make for an impactful and pretty awesome movie. Number 8. The Question. Vic Sage, aka The Question, is one of the greatest detectives of the DC universe. Yes, even ranking upside along Batman. Despite having no superpowers, his analytical abilities, finding clues which are overlooked by most people, plus his skill as a fearsome interrogator and martial artist, somewhat on par with Batman, and his faceless mask made of an experimental material called pseudoderm that enables him to change disguises easily, plus his somewhat eccentric personality, make him an incredibly interesting and kinda somewhat creepy protagonist. An old school detective noir movie can easily make him a fan favorite. For any of you who have seen Zack Snyder's Watchmen or who have read the DC comic of the same name, the character of Rorschach was based off of The Question, so we already know that a character like this can work on film. It's just a matter of creating a story that the character can support all on his own. I also think that even a story about his protege, Renee Montoya, would also potentially be even better.
Number 7. Escapade. I love Escapade, and I also love her BFF Morgan Red. While initially introduced as a criminal in the Marvel Voices Pride issue of this year, I think it's safe to say that Escapade and her friend Morgan and his genetically engineered flying turtle pal, Hibbert, will soon become a team of mutant heroes instead of anti-heroes. I mean, even if they are criminals who steal stuff, they really only try to steal stuff from the worst people, which makes them still pretty altruistic. Escapade is a trans mutant named Sheila Sexton, whose powers involve swapping places with whoever she decides to use her mutant powers on. This can be someone as low level as a random passerby, or someone as high level as another superpowered being who is about to defeat her, or even the President of the United States. So much potential for this power.
Number 6. Bolt. Since the live-action Black Adam movie was announced, DC decided that they would also put out a Black Adam solo series for the first time. And in the first issue, it puts Black Adam on the ropes of mortality. In response to this, Black Adam finds his descendant, Malik Adam White, a medical student living in the Bronx. Basically, Black Adam just tells this guy he is going to succeed Black Adam and inherit his power, and then he forces him by having one of his people pop a cap in Malik, and the only way to save himself is to take Black Adam's ring and say Shazam. While Black Adam calls Malik White Adam, Malik gives a good little lecture about the inherent racism there. So he prefers to go by Thunderbolt or just straight up Bolt. From what I've read, I really like his character, and he is supposed to represent a sort of form of redemption for the character of Black Adam because, as they say in the comic, there is no true redemption for Black Adam. Not at this point, at least.
Number 5. Amass. Amass is a really cool new mutant. They made their first appearance in Steve Orlando's Marauder series in issue number 4. Amass is a mutant of Threshold, the oldest mutant civilization to have ever existed. They, along with 2 other mutants, had their minds stored within a codex, hoping that they would arrive in the future after being restored and would be able to seek help for their people who were on the brink of extinction when they last left them in the past. Amass's mutant powers allowed them to physically combine mutants and their powers together, joining together to create one basically big ball of mutants, which kinda looks like one big being. Hence their mutant name of Amass. This appears to both psychologically and physically combine whichever mutants they choose with themselves, with their new combined form also possessing all the powers of said mutants, which I think is pretty nuts.
Number 4. Grey Wolf. Of the characters I'm talking about on this list, my favorites are absolutely a 3-way tie between Tosin, Bitewing, and this guy, Grey Wolf. Okay, so Lex Luthor was running a crime-fighting experiment around the world trying to create a group of his own similar to Batman Incorporated, with the ultimate goal of creating Abyss, his own Batman. But then he abandoned all these projects that then went wild doing their own thing. So Batman Incorporated's international team, being led by Ghostmaker, go on a mission to bring them down in Batman 2022 Annual Volume 3 Number 1 from July. Their first mission is to Kazbek Chechnya to take on Grey Wolf. Grey Wolf was unleashed on the city to help its citizens who had been exposed to Lazarus resin that had made them all extremely violent. With Ghostmaker, he was able to cure the residents and join Batman Inc. as a good guy, but he displayed enough skill to best Dark Ranger, El Gaucho, and Batman of Japan in a 3-on-1 fight, and he beat Wingman 1-on-1. Also, he's like 7 feet tall minimum. Super cool.
Number 3. Black Mist. Black Mist is a completely new character who is not yet a member of Batman Incorporated, but who might end up becoming one in the future. She was actually one of my favorite characters to appear in Batman Inc. issue number 1 from 2022. Not only does she look like a badass, but she also seems to be wary of joining up with Batman Inc. Black Mist appears as a sort of consulting detective in issue number 1 of the 3rd volume of this series. We don't know much about her yet, but she seems to be working with Batman Incorporated to help them solve the mystery behind just who is killing all the teachers of Batman and Ghostmaker, and why and how this perpetrator is doing that. One thing we do know about Black Mist straight out of the gate is that she seems to have history with the Knight. The two recognize each other and are presented as friendly to one another.
Number 2. Egro the Unbreakable. Okay, so this one definitely took me by a bit of a surprise. Coming out of the 2022 volume of Thunderbolts, specifically issue number 2, we are introduced to Egro. Egro is a super interesting little troll-looking monster who lives peacefully on Monster Isle. But you see, Egro heard of the monster exhibit at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, so naturally he expected to go and see his own statue. He just had to make sure that it captured his true beauty. But what the heck? They didn't have a statue for Egro the Unbreakable? An insult like that could not fly, so he obviously had to destroy the other statues for the other monsters, which brought the Thunderbolts to fight him. Instead, after Egro punched Power Man through the roof with his big lava hands and incapacitated Persuasion with his telepathic abilities, which helped him learn English, he surrendered to America Chavez and explained the situation. Then, he was invited to join the team. Yay! Happy ending for the little steroid Yoda.
Number 1. Nightmite. Just like Superman has Mr. Mxyzptlk and Batman has Batmite, Dick Grayson, the superhero known as Nightwing, now has his own imp superfan from the 5th dimension, Dixel, though Dixel prefers to be known as Nightmite. While it might seem strange to put an imp from the 5th dimension on a superhero list given, you know, some of their track records, Nightmite is genuinely well-meaning and helpful, unlike most other imps who are somewhat mischievous or just downright troublesome. Being an imp from the 5th dimension also means that Dixel can be super powerful, as he has magical, reality-bending, and warping powers. Nightmite made his first appearance very recently in the comics, as of the time of this recording, in issue number 98 of Nightwing, which was released in November of 2022. Number 10. Sentry. Okay. I know we all probably are familiar with the Sentry ourselves, but we can't have a list about forgotten heroes and just not mention the Sentry, the greatest hero that the world forgot. Sentry has a super sad story, so grab some tissues and hold them close while I regale you. Robert Reynolds was an addict who, after sneaking into a lab late one night looking for a fix, stumbled upon the Golden Sentry formula. After he had quaffed the formula, I love that word, quaffed, he was transformed into the Sentry, an amazing hero with a slew of powerful abilities. We're talking flight, teleportation, molecule manipulation, super strength, and super speed, virtually invulnerability, to name a few. Unfortunately, Robert's mind was unstable, and while embodying the superhero Sentry, he also became his antithesis, the Void. In a last-ditch attempt to save the world from the effects of his supervillain alter ego, Mr. Fantastic was forced to create a device that would make Robert and the whole world forget about the Sentry, hoping that it would destroy the Void and protect Robert from the darker side of himself. So yeah, we didn't really forget about him, but everyone in the comics forgot about him. So yeah. Number 9. Green Llama. Introduced in the 1940s, the Green Llama was a hero who embodied the ideals of Buddhism. Oddly enough, sort of like a Buddhist Batman, though his look echoes that of Green Arrow, or even perhaps Green Lantern. In other words, it involves a lot of green, and even a cute little cape. Though interestingly enough, the Green Llama is not a DC hero and not a Marvel one either. He comes to us from Moonstone Books Publishing and was introduced in their Double Detective series, volume number 5. Something unique that he brings is a more Eastern-inspired outlook, which would be even more interesting if he were a genuine character from Tibet, perhaps. Instead, he is a student of Buddhism who studied in Tibet but is from New York. He returned to New York to share his Buddhist beliefs and provide spiritual guidance, but he ultimately decided that the mystical Buddhist powers he had acquired were even more useful fighting crime. When I said he was similar to Batman, I was responding to his crime-fighting beliefs, and that he does not use a gun, believing they would make him just as bad as those who he seeks to defeat. And the fact that he's also super rich. Number 8. Phantom Rider, also known as Knight Rider. No, I'm not talking about that Knight Rider, the classic TV show starring David Hasselhoff, and his high-tech car KITT. Though Michael Knight is a hero too, I suppose. I am talking about Marvel's Knight Rider, aka Phantom Rider, aka Ghost Rider? That's right, this Ghost Rider actually predates Johnny Blaze. Carter Slade, the horse-riding boxing champion of the Wild West, who is the Phantom Rider, would have been known as Ghost Rider as well had they not introduced Johnny after Slade's death in the comics in 1972. Carter Slade was a man who was near death when he was taken in and revived by Native Americans who realized that he was a man destined to fight injustice. They healed him, gave him some magic powder, snazzy white cape, and a white horse. He went on to round up criminals, but met his end sacrificing his life for his brothers, crushed by rubble. His brother Lincoln Slade would eventually adopt his mantle, Phantom Rider. Both have returned in spirit form, but have never been fully resurrected.
Number 7. Spider-Man. This alternate version of the character is like something out of a horror story, and I've personally always been a big fan of that idea for Spider-Man characters. That integration of horror that we sometimes see. I mean, the character, when you think about it, is meant to be someone whose genetics mutated and became kind of spliced with the spiders. What isn't freaky about that, I ask you? Spider-Man is a version of Peter who fell into a vat of spiders and ended up being devoured, but at the same time his consciousness remained, being transferred to that of spiders. So think Swarm, but with spiders instead of bees. And voila! He became the horrifying alternate version of Spidey known as Spiders-Man, with all of Peter's memories but without his original body, and where his power is spiders. Number 6. Stan the Spider-Man? A very brief appearance for this character, but still, this is a thing that officially happened in the comics. Stan Lee is even listed as being this version of Spider-Man in the breakdown of characters who appeared in this issue online. Spider-Geddon issue number 5 at the beginning has a tribute to Stan the Man Lee, who passed away the same year only about a month earlier. But the tribute isn't confined to just the cover or the insert in his memory. They also included a tribute in the story for Stan, where he appears as one of the alternate Spider-Men, helping to save the day. We don't know much about this alternate Spider-Man, but we do know he's meant to be an alternate version of both Spidey and Stan combined. Number 5. The Spider. Still a bit of a mysterious figure for us. The Spider is an alternate version of Spider-Man where instead of Peter Parker, we have Detective George Stacy in the role. Yep, that's right, that's Gwen's father. In fact, he even joined up with his alternate daughter, Ghost Spider, who recruited him for the Spider Army. That had to have been interesting. Detective Stacy seems to fake an injury to help keep his identity a secret. We know that in the alternate Earth that he is from, he still has his daughter Gwen, or had her. It's unclear as to whether she is still alive or maybe died when we first meet him. He wears an all-black suit which looks like a tactical stealth suit with white lines stretching from the crown of his head down to his forehead, and a thin white spider on his chest. Number 4. Spider-Girl. But not any of the first people to come to mind when we say Spider-Girl. This alternate version of Spider-Man comes to us from the What If series, from an issue where we get to imagine 3 different characters becoming Spider-Man. One of them being Betty Brant. Betty Brant's Spider-Girl has really only made a few major appearances in the comics since her debut in 1978, and when you see her costume, I'm sure you're gonna understand perhaps why that's happened. In the What If series, hers was one of the few that didn't end in death, with her quitting being Spider-Girl instead after she learned she had failed to stop Uncle Ben's killer. Rather than be inspired to commit to a life as a vigilante, this event actually had the opposite effect on Betty Brant, though we'd find out later that Betty didn't completely give up being Spider-Girl, as she would appear much later in the Spider-Verse story. Number 3. Savage Spider-Man. I know there have probably been a lot of characters from various stories who share this kind of origins, but Savage Spider-Man's still always makes me think of Cyclops, aka Scott Summers. I know he's not the only one to have an origins like this, but they're similar to me. This version of Peter Parker was the only known survivor after the plane he was on with his his parents exploded. That's the part that's similar. The rest of it is not. Young Peter managed to parachute to safety, but landed in Savage Land, right in the middle of a nest of giant spiders. These spiders raised him as their own, and it was through their venomous bites that he gained powers as well as likely building up a natural resistance. I'm assuming that part, but I think it's fair to guess. This version of Spider-Man is the sworn protector of the Savage Lands from all of those who would seek to do it harm or do harm to its creatures. Not on Savage Spider-Man's watch. Basically Spider Tarzan. Number 2, the other old man Peter. I call him the other, not in reference to that storyline, the other, but in reference to the fact that we have alternate old man Peter Parker from Reign, who, while still obscure, is a little more well known, I think, because, well, he's just so frighteningly sad and memorable. Other old man Peter, however, is still pretty excellent, and I think he deserves to be remembered as well. He's a lot more optimistic than his fellow old counterpart, except when it comes to one thing. This version of Peter Parker resides in a retirement home with an elderly Wade Flippin' Wilson. Understandably, both elderly alternates appear in the Spider-Man / Deadpool series and end up getting involved in an adventure with our mainstream heroes themselves. In this alternate reality, Peter Parker lives out the rest of his life after getting paralyzed from the waist down, getting around in a wheelchair. But of course, still 100% a badass, because yeah, people in wheelchairs also a badass. He can even roll up walls and still is insanely strong. Still not a Spidey that you would want to mess with. Also, I love that old man Spidey always has like a bow tie. I just think it's super cute. Number 1, Golden Sponge Cake Spider-Man. Basically, Hostess Spider-Man. This alternate Spider-Man was far too good for our world and was one of the first killed in the Spider-Verse event. No! He fought his villains by using tasty Hostess snacks, which apparently can tame any villain. Is the reality just like that villains are all hungry? I wonder if they would work on Galactus. You need some big ones. Hostess Spider-Man originally appeared in the Hostess brand ads, but as the Spider-Verse is a wide world event, he was incorporated into the main story, only to really be killed off, poor guy. His editorial name had to be changed due to trademark issues, as he was, of course, no longer running in a Hostess ad. But on to the main story, baby. Does this mean there is a whole alternate world filled with Hostess ad characters? Because Spider-Man wasn't the only hero to appear in those. What happened to the rest of that world? Is it still out there? I want to go to that alternate Earth.
Number 10, Daredevil. No, not that Daredevil. This Daredevil is Bart Hill, who witnessed his father's murder before the killer branded him with a hot iron, making him mute with shock. He learned to become an expert boomerang thrower and became a costumed crime fighter. He was later rendered unmute with no explanation, and honestly isn't that interesting. He actually appeared after Superman, but fell into the public domain and has therefore been used by several different publishers, although they often change his name to avoid conflicts with the Marvel legal team. Number 9, Miss Fury. First appearing in 1941 in newspaper strips published by Bell Syndicate, Marla Drake was a wealthy socialite who was attending a party when she discovered that another woman was wearing the same outfit as her. In order to prevent embarrassment, she changed into a ceremonial panther skin outfit that her uncle had taken from Africa and willed to her. The suit of course granted her superpowers, which she used to fight crime and achieve a level of cultural appropriation most white people can only dream of. Talk about my culture is not a costume. Her powers are basic acrobatic, climbing, and fighting powers, and she was known for using her claws and whip against her enemies. She actually didn't use the suit very often, as her manservant, a Brazilian albino Indian named Albino Joe, Jesus Christ. Well, he warned her that every favor that was gained through black magic would result with 2 misfortunes. Her comic strip appearances were later compiled by the company that would one day become Marvel, Timely Comics. This has made the rights to her a little hard to follow, as she is considered canon to the Marvel universe, but also has appeared in comics published by both Malibu and Dynamite Comics. What makes her notable is that Miss Fury was the first female superhero to actually be created by a woman. Alright, that's all of the characters who you could argue were part of the Golden Age. From here on out, all of the entries were created before Superman first appeared in June 1938. Number 8, Doc Savage. Doc Savage, the Man of Bronze, first appeared in Doc Savage magazine number 1 in 1933, 5 whole years before Superman. He appeared in pulp magazines, which would tell the stories of the character in prose with some illustrations, rather than in a purely visual medium as comics would end up doing later. In 2016, Stan Lee actually went on on record as saying that Doc Savage was the forerunner to modern superheroes as we know them. Doc Savage's story is that his father assembled a group of scientists who were all experts in their fields to train his son almost from birth to make him a perfect human specimen who is at peak human condition and is a master martial artist and scientist, physician, inventor, explorer, and detective. He was raised in the jungle where he received a really intense tan, earning him the nickname the Man of Bronze. After his father was killed, he decided to devote himself to fighting crime, traveling the world and battling criminals. He is extremely rich and has a base in the Arctic that he calls the Fortress of Solitude. He is aided by a team of friends known as the Fabulous Five, who are all experts in their scientific fields, but of course not as expert as Doc Savage is. In his third appearance in 1933, Quest of the Spider, he is referred to as a Superman by one of his colleagues. Doc Savage has appeared in pulp novels, radio stories, and movies over the years, but isn't nearly as well known as the hero he inspired. He has made comic appearances for both Marvel, DC, and Dark Horse over the years. Number 7. Psi-Force. When a telepathic CIA agent named Emmett Proudhawk had a vision about 5 young people with psychic abilities being protected by a hawk, he decided to track down the people in his vision and bring them together to become Psi-Force. He got most of them together but was killed by a Russian operative. The 5 psychic youths discovered that when they all touched Proudhawk's mystic medallion, it summoned a creature called the Psi-Hawk who would help them defeat their enemies. You know, like Captain Planet. The youths worked together to defeat an evil Russian paranormal named Rostov, and they were chased by members of the CIA, the KGB, and a shadowy organization called the Medusa Web, who eventually brought the kids on as freelance agents. Although they had their own 32-issue series, the fact that this Marvel team has no recognizable superheroes and is based in Earth 148,611 rather than the mainstream Earth 616 universe keeps them pretty obscure. Number 6. Force of July. The first DC entry on this list, Force of July were an Americana-themed group who often found themselves at odds with the Outsiders. The Force answered to the American Security Agency and were tasked with eliminating anyone whose activities were deemed to be subversive to America's interests by any means necessary. Some of the team's members include Lady Liberty, Silent Majority, Sparkler, Mayflower, and their leader, Major Victory. Although they aren't technically villains, their fanatic patriotism prevented them from seeing that they were being manipulated by their handler, who was using them to help his scheme to create a satellite called Project Orwell that would have been used to spy on people using their televisions. This plot was stopped by the Outsiders, and the Force of July later found themselves fighting against the Suicide Squad, who killed Sparkler and Mayflower. The remaining members ended up joining the squad but did not last long on the team's roster. Number 5. The Inferior Five. Coming from Earth 12 in the DC multiverse, this team are the Nepo babies of a team of heroes called the Freedom Brigade. When the Freedom Brigade retired, the heroes encouraged their children to follow in their footsteps, and they started a team dedicated to protecting the people of Megaopolis. Known as the Fearsome Five, the members of this team, Awkward Man, Blimp, Dumb Bunny, and Whitefeather, have somewhat useless and conflicting powers, and although they usually manage to save the day, it is usually a result of dumb luck rather than skill. Their lameness led to the people of Megalopolis calling their champions the Inferior Five, which the team eventually decided to adopt as their official name. In Crisis on Infinite Earths, their world was destroyed, and as a result they were sent to comic book limbo, which is a realm similar to the Island of Misfit Toys, where characters who are written out of continuity remain until they're brought back into continuity. Number 4. The League of Losers. In the Marvel universe of Earth 6215, a time-traveling villain from the future named Kronoke used his knowledge of the past to travel back in time to the present with an army and kill all of Earth's mightiest heroes. Fortunately, the records he was working off of did not include any reference to these C-list Marvel characters because none of them had ever done anything that was worthy of note. Darkhawk, Speedball, Dagger, Terror, X-23, Gravity, and Sleepwalker were thus able to take on Kronoke and travel back to before the villain had stolen his time travel tech and stop him. Although this stranded the team in the future, it also created a divergent timeline known as Earth 2992, where the villain's scheme was never an issue. Wow, time travel can be such a pain to explain. Number 3. Section 8. One of the strangest teams in the DC universe, Section 8 is a group of what I will very generously call heroes who operate out of Gotham City. Each member of the team is more bizarre than the last, so buckle up. Shakes is a schizophrenic with a speech impediment. Jean de Baton is a stereotypical Frenchman who hits people with a baton. Defenestrator is a massive former Arkham inmate who carries around a window to smash over his enemies' heads. Flemgem spits massive amounts of snot at his enemies in order to blind them. Bueno Excelente is just some guy who sneaks up on his enemies and then essays them. Dog Welder is a crazy person who welds dogs to people's faces, and Friendly Fire Fire is a hero who can shoot energy beams, but is incapable of hitting anything he aims at, usually hitting his teammates instead. They are led by Sixpack, an alcoholic who pees himself and then attacks people with a beer bottle. Shockingly, this team has not gotten a big budget movie, and all of them were killed after an encounter with the mini angled ones, with the exception of Sixpack, who suddenly manifested reality warping powers to defeat the villains and save the world. Number 2, the Neo Knights. After having great success publishing comic books based on Hasbro's line of G.I. Joe toys, the two companies collaborated again to create the series that would give much needed backstory for Hasbro's new line of toys, the Transformers. A lot of the Transformers mythology came from these comics, but due to the rights of certain characters remaining with the comic book company, not all of the elements were brought over for the television series or subsequent films. One of these elements is the superhero team, the Neo Knights. When the Autobots returned to space, leaving no one to protect their longtime ally, GB Blackrock, he decided to bring together a team of superpowered humans in order to fight any Decepticons that caused trouble on Earth. The members are Circuit Breaker, a woman who was paralyzed in an encounter with the Transformers and has developed a special suit that allows her to walk as well as fly and shoot repulsor beams. Also on the team are Thunder Punch, a man who can enlarge his feet and hands and punch with heightened strength, Rapture, a woman who can cause any sentient being to shut down and enter an elaborate fantasy, and Dynamo, who could channel the planet's latent energies. They are extremely obscure, only showing up in the original US and UK Transformers comics, and due to Hasbro having the rights for most of the Transformers and Marvel owning the rights to this team, they are likely to remain so for quite some time. Number 1, the Forgotten Heroes. They may have more appearances than some of the other teams on this list, and some of their members are relatively well known, but with a name like the Forgotten Heroes, how could they not end up on the top spot for this list? The team consists of a bunch of DC heroes who all stumbled upon ancient golden pyramids. When the heroes tried to report what they had found, the US government disavowed them and ruined each of their reputations to discredit them. Immortal Man brought all the heroes together and filled them in that the pyramids were part of a scheme by Vandal Savage to kill Superman. They formed a team together and teamed up with the Man of Steel to stop Vandal's plot. The team lives up to its name with members like Atomic Knight, Ballistic Congo Bill, Cave Carson, Dolphin, The Ray, Vigilante, and Resurrection Man, as well as a few slightly more well-known heroes such as Rip Hunter, Animal Man, and Rick Flag.
Number 10, Uncle Ben Spider-Man. I've had people ask me before about a world where Uncle Ben potentially becomes Spider-Man, and well, I'm here to tell you it already exists. This version of Uncle Ben first appeared in the Spider-Verse story. He was with Peter when the radioactive spider came along and ended up biting him instead of young Peter Parker. Discovering he had gained powers, Uncle Ben set out to do what you'd expect him to, try and use them for good to help people. However, this career as a vigilante would be short-lived. After the murder of his wife May and nephew Peter at the hands of his arch nemesis, he retired. For a while, he also went into hiding after Ezekiel Sims came to warn him of Morlun. Eventually, however, he would be found by Silk, who would then, with the help of the other spiders, recruit him into their ranks to help them take on the Inheritors. Number 9, Webslinger. Webslinger is our Wild West Spider-Man. Named Patrick O'Hara, this alternate Spider-Man first appeared in the comics in 2014, and would also have an animated version of his character appear a few years later in 2016 in the Disney XD animated series Ultimate Spider-Man. Webslinger also works alongside his partner and horse, Widow. We'd also learn that he has a special connection with his horse as well. They were actually both bitten by the same radioactive spider, which grants them a telepathic connection that Webslinger likes to refer to as his rider sense. And before we move on to our next spot, if you love the world of alternate Spider-Man as much as I do, be sure to show that love by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 8, Spider-Man. While fans of the world of Spider Totems and alternate Spideys may know Spider-Man, she's still only made just a handful of appearances in the comics, if you can believe that. I decided to include her here to shout out how awesome she is to those who have yet to meet her, because Spider-Man deserves a series of her own, or at the very least, a movie appearance. And Into the Spider-Verse 2, maybe? We see Spider-Man's origins in a what-if issue where the question is posed, what if Aunt May had been bitten by that fateful radioactive spider instead? After Peter forgot to take his lunch with him to school, Aunt May set out to deliver it, and it was while running this errand that she was bitten by the spider, granting her powers instead of Peter. And Spider-Man was born! In this reality, Uncle Ben and Peter Parker still both live as well, and are actually part of Aunt May's team, knowing her secret. Uncle Ben provides the heart, Peter's the brains, and May provides the courage and the bronze.
Number 7, Jill Trent, also known as the Science Sleuth. Jill Trent was a hero based out of the US. She took on criminals and solved mysteries with detective and inventing skills, and the power of Science. Science is pretty cool. She also had her friend Daisy to accompany her. Her and Daisy even shared a bed, which makes a lot of people speculate that she could have been one of the first queer heroes to have ever appeared in comics. Jill Trent made her debut in the Fighting Yank Volume 6 in 1943, originally published by Neater Publishing, who has since then ceased operations. I think Jill would be a rad hero to bring back. I would love to see a female, possibly queer scientist take down some criminals. Who wouldn't? Number 6, Forget-Me-Not. Although this X-Men was recently introduced, making his debut in the comics in 2014, you may have already forgotten him. Though, like with the Sentry, that might not be your fault. Forget-Me-Not's abilities is imperceptibility. That is to say, it is almost impossible to remember him, and he is also hard to target. As your mind struggles hard to remember him, that can also leave him sometimes undetectable. His powers are so strong, they even mess with those who also possess telepathic gifts, including Charles Xavier, who basically had to set an hourly psychic alarm to remind himself of Forget-Me-Not's existence, so he wouldn't forget. Now, that's someone who everyone could forget about. Wait, who are we talking about again? Number 5, Cyber 6. When it comes to this hero/heroine, I mostly think back to the cartoon series inspired by the comics, and watching it late at night on TV as a kid. The cartoon series, by the way, was actually produced in Vancouver, Canada, fun fact, though the animation was done in Japan. The comic book series, like the cartoon series, also originated in the 1990s. The comic series originated in Argentina, although it was published in Italy. Cyber 6 is a story of a genetically engineered woman who goes by the same name. She escaped her creator, a Nazi overlord who seeks world domination. Living in the city, she adopts the identity of a male literature teacher named Adrian Seidelman by day, and fights off her creator's creatures at night, who have been sent after her. Cyber 6 also uncovers many mysteries in regards to her past, fellow siblings known as Cybers, and her evil creator's dastardly plots. Number 4, Captain Ultra. We may forget this hero for good reason. When Captain Ultra is first introduced in the comics, making a brief appearance in Fantastic Four Volume 1 issue 177, it is revealed that he has a fear of fire. That's one of the first things we learn about him. Yep. And when I say he has a fear, what I really mean is he is borderline terrified, to the point that someone lights a cigarette, just lights a match, and he faints. Griffin Goggle, yep, that is Captain Ultra's real life name, is what I like to call a background hero. From his brief stint with the Defenders to the tiniest of appearances in the Civil War II event, Griffin is a hero who never really comes to the forefront in the comics, which is why he is probably one who often remains forgotten. He's also a bit of a knob. When flirting with Hellcat, he gets overly competitive and aggressive with Nova and Jack of Hearts, who he deems as threats to their love. And keep in mind, he's just met her at this point. Later, when Hellcat asks the heroes to stop fighting over her, Captain Ultra instead gets aggressive with her and accuses her of playing the field. Oh boy. Maybe a hero better forgotten. Number 3, Scorpion. Wait, no, not that Scorpion. The other Scorpion. I'm talking about Carmilla Black. If you are not familiar with Carmilla Black, no worries at all. I'm going to give you some facts that will probably cause you to want to track her down, as she is not someone who is often explored in the comics, which is unfortunate because she's pretty awesome. She was genetically created by AIM, but didn't know about this until later, as she was raised by adoptive parents who were also secretly AIM agents. Surprise. Her powers surfaced on her prom night, causing what she calls her stinger arm to accidentally shoot her boyfriend and kill him. As if prom night isn't usually awkward enough, jeez. Her abilities allow her full immunity to most toxins. In fact, she has the ability to absorb toxins and convert them into her own biological weapon, which she can then use to prick her enemies with via her stinger arm. While often being involved in heroic tasks, she has been involved in both good and bad organizations, having worked for both S.H.I.E.L.D. and Hydra. Woo! And fun fact, she even beat Matt Gargan in a fight after he came after her for using his old name. He had the Venom symbiote with him at the time, and her body was able to absorb some of it and create a Neo symbiote, which she used to send Gargan running before the Neo symbiote died, as a result of her body being too toxic for it. Number 2, Azrael. Whatever happened to Azrael? You might remember this controversial hero as Batman. After the events of Nightfall, Bruce Wayne is forced to relinquish his title while taking time to heal after he had his back broken. He entrusts Gotham to Azrael and asks him to watch over the city and take up the mantle of Batman while he's away. Jean-Paul Valley was trained to be used as a tool by a radical and evil religious group called the Order of Saint Dumas, a group who were once part of the historical Knights Templars. Ooh. And unfortunately, this resulted in him being, well, a little crazy. He regained the city as Batman, taking it back from Bane, and then began a brutal onslaught of vigilante justice. While he didn't kill Bane, he brutalized him and every other criminal he came across, no matter how minor. He actually almost killed the Joker. It was his lack of restraint and madness that ended up leading to his downfall as Batman. And when Bruce returned, the two ended up having to battle over the title of Batman. Jean-Paul was reluctant to give it up. Once forced to give it up by Bruce, who won the fight, he wandered homeless and crazy for a while. He ended up defeating the Order of Saint Dumas eventually, whom he realized were his enemies, but after that he basically just became Bruce's and the Bat family's assistant, helping him whenever he was called upon and acting on Bruce's every order. He died and was briefly resurrected as a Black Lantern, but it would be nice to see a real return of Azrael in the comics. Maybe a story where he tries to find and follow his own path? Number 1. Stardust, the Super Wizard, one of the oldest superheroes on our list. Stardust, the Super Wizard, comes to us from the Fantastic Comics collection. He debuted in issue number 1 in 1939. The series was published by Fox Feature Syndicate, and each issue had a collection of short heroic stories. While you may remember the main hero, Samson, Stardust is one of the others that have fallen by the wayside. Probably one of the first cosmic heroes. Stardust is often seen flying around outer space trying to bust criminal space wizards. Yeah, apparently criminal space wizards were a thing back in the 1930s. His comics are a combo of sci-fi and superheroics, as he fights criminals with his astounding number of different rays. He's a wizard with a ray for every different occasion. Boomerang ray, transporting ray, reducing ray, all the rays. And beams sometimes too. Sometimes he uses beams. If you weren't aware of the Fantastic Comics collections, you should check them out. There is even a sort of female superhero snuck in one of the issues. I say sort of because she wasn't really given a title, but her name is Alice, and she is both the romantic partner and adventure partner of Richard, the Golden Knight, who is also featured in the series. Guess she's kind of more like a sidekick.